I mean, in a way, this is all very ahead of its time. He's like, oh, people climbing in the gym, what a waste of their effort. They should be hanging on the hangboard and training and doing weights and all that. And I'm like, wow, he's 30 years ahead of all the gym bros now. This is Climbing Gold.
So what did you do to train? I mean, obviously there wasn't climbing gyms and there wasn't even backer ladders then, right?
No,
Or is that how you invented it?
yeah, that's, I made that thing just as a portable training device that you could take around with you. Um, yeah, I just started studying kinesiology and stuff, yeah, working the muscles that get used in climbing, I just started developing my own ideas on training, um, working, I do pull-ups and fingertip hangs and fingertip pull-ups and things like that. I mean, back then, like, no one was really doing fingertip hangs, interval hangs and stuff like that. And I just kind of came up with the idea from track intervals, you do, so I started thinking that way and applying those kind of approaches to climbing training.
I didn't know that John Bachar knew so much about track and field. I was like,
Yeah,
did he train as a runner?
yeah, he did. So basically,
He was like a high school track athlete or
he was
something?
a high school track athlete, and then climbing showed up.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, hearing him talk about interval hangs and stuff like that. It's like basically all the same things that people still talk about for training.
That's cool. It's kind of like you and Tony and Arrow were sort of the people that figured that out early.
Yeah, he was close. He didn't have the kinesiological knowledge that I had. So he was doing a couple things I thought were kind of dumb, but
He's like Tony Nero. He was trying, but kind of dumb. It's just like it's such a classic.
The character comes through in this tape.
Yeah, the character definitely comes through. It's like all the stories. That's so funny because I mean Tony Nero is also sort of well respected as one of the early leaders in training and did some of the hardest grades in the world. And it's like I'm sure he probably was training in ways that are now considered suboptimal, but to dismiss it all as like, oh, he was kind of dumb. You're like, dude. You're like,
What kind of things did you learn from your kinesiology? Like,
well, just like basically follow the SAID principle, SAID, specific adaptation to imposed demands. I mean, all this stuff came from the Russians in the 60s, basically, power training. Got way into studying the Russian power system. A lot of kinesiological facts that if you just know about them are going to help you train it. Like you can't train muscles that function isometrically with kinetic training. So hand squeezers aren't going to do you any good for building finger strength. And you see people with hand squeezers today, doing kinetic exercises to develop hand strength when your muscles, your forearm muscles in climbing are used isometrically. And you just grab and latch on. You're not like pulling up with your fingers or anything like that. Your calves are used isometrically. Your lats and your arms are used both ways. You pull up and also you have to be able to hold on isometrically. So I developed, just invent exercises to develop those capabilities. Facts like you can do 200 pull-ups a day, but the tension in the muscle is still the same. And if you want to develop power, you have to increase the actual tension inside the muscle. And then it adapts, it adapts to the imposed demands on it. So, it's better to do pull-ups with weights than it is to do 600 pull-ups a day.
it's funny to hear him say it's better to do pull-ups with weight than to do 200 pull-ups a day, which is a lesson that I learned myself, over the years. Because I'm like, as a kid, I was doing 150 pull-ups before bed, and then as you get older, you're like, wait, that doesn't actually do anything for your climbing. And now I do a handful of one arms at the end of a session, and basically call that good. Just kind of the equivalent is doing weighted pull-up or something. But it's like in a whole training session now, I do like 9 pull-ups. But they're just very hard.
Mostly comes from the powerlifting world. All the training principles that they've done in Soviet Union, basically in the 60s, is still the shit that's get people to the top nowadays. But they had an incredible program where in America they had nothing. I mean, they had tens of thousands of athletes that they studied the shit out of and found out all these things, you know. So, you know, it's like see people doing laps around the wall in the gym and stuff, and it's just really counterproductive, you know, the better, or do a bunch of climbs in the gym, and it's really counterproductive because you can't control the resistance and duration of exercises in a gym, you know. You have to get to the hang board, you have to start tallying stuff down, pull-ups at weights, one-arms at weights, things like that.
I mean, in a way, this is all very ahead of its time. He's like, oh, people climbing in the gym, what a waste of their effort. They should be hanging on the hangboard and training and doing weights and all that. And I'm like, wow, he's 30 years ahead of all the gym bros now.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I think that was like the thing that I thought was really that you'd appreciate. Like it's basically like this sort of process that you're getting to hear about, which, you know, yes, the terminology has changed, but this is
but
the
the
basic,
concepts are the
the
same.
concept's the same. And to think about that somebody actually had to invent this for our sport. And that's what John was really doing, is he was turning to those resources of like the Soviet training facilities for powerlifting to be like, how do I make this better for climbing? And
yeah, the interesting thing is that he's not really acknowledged as being a leader in training for this, I don't think, probably because he didn't quite, I mean, I guess he did a little bit, and there's, you know, things like the Bachar ladder and things like sort of training tools named after him. But in some ways, I think that people who have written books on the subject or coaches or, you know, noted trainers and things have done more to sort of advance that than what he was doing individually. I mean, I think, you know, his individual achievements in climbing sort of spoke to what he was doing, but it certainly didn't. This all feels ahead of its time. You know, it's like all the stuff he's talking about. I'm like, this was not popular until the last 10 years, basically.
And he's reflecting back, you know, basically on the late 70s or early 80s. And it makes you realize like that's like all even like pre-gym, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He's like 15 years ahead of the time.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I would climb, and then, you know, when at the end of the day, I would train, and I had a schedule and you know, a training diary, the whole thing, and I would graph my progress in certain exercises. You know, like I'd say the two principal ones were like the 2-arm pull-up with weight, just gauge my 1 rep max, and the hang, fingertip hang on like probably a 3/4 inch edge with weight, and see what kind of weights I could hang with. And I'd keep track of that and, you know, constantly try to increase my 1 rep max in those.
So your 1 rep max, meaning the maximum amount of weight you could have hanging from you and still do 1 pull-up?
Well, no, you know, I would separate, you know, like some people do fingertip pull-ups with weights, but that's kind of dumb too, because basically you kind of split the exercise between your lats and your fingers. So as soon as you do fingertip pull-ups with weights, you can't put as much weight on as you can hang with to do a pull-up. So, like, I used to be able to do 1 fingertip, this on a 3/4 inch edge, because with weights I would train with a comfy first knuckle edge. You know, I could do 1 pull-up with 100 pounds, and on a bar I could do a pull-up with like 140.
It's interesting to hear him. He just started throwing out some numbers like his 1 rep max for weighted pull-ups. I'm like, okay, 140, like that's a lot. That's a heavy pull-up.
I know.
Like,
I was just, yeah, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, but it's interesting. All the principles he's talking about are all exactly. It all seems totally correct now.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, why do weighted fingertip pull-ups when you should just separate it into weighted hangs and then weighted pull-ups, and you should be doing those 2 separate things. I'm like, well, that's all exactly the same nowadays.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Oftentimes when we look back at the Stone Masters, or like the 1970s era, it's like, obviously we did the whole series on Dope Lake where they're like smoking weed all the time. And there's a side of it where this sort of runs so counter. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
this
this
guy is
definitely
like
runs
literally
counter.
like talking about graphs and like all this stuff. And it's so interesting that
Yeah, he's
we
taking
look
that
back.
Soviet training techniques and he's graphing them in his notebook. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
that's really contrary to people taking a bunch of LSD and then climbing big walls.
Totally.
Yeah, this all feels like exactly what some bro is doing in the gym right now. Just like graphing it on the app and keeping track of his 1 rep max, and you know.
So that tells you something right away. If you want to maximize the tension put into the lats, use a bar. Forget about the fingertip edge. And then with a hang, if I was just doing a hang, fingertip hang, and I didn't have to do a pull-up, you know, I could use 150 pounds or something like that. So then I could increase the tension in the tendons more that way. So, you know, it's just like basic power training principles. You know, isolate the muscle that you want to work on.
Dude, doing hangs with 150 pounds seems kind of savage.
You know, over a long period of time, so it gets stronger. So combining the exercise, it doesn't really maximize either in that situation. You know.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you heard that, like doing hangs with 150 pounds.
So burly.
But you can also tell this is old school because he's still using imperial. You're like, oh, you got to switch to millimeter edges. Nowadays, everything's in millimeters. So I'm like, what's a 3/4 inch edge? I'm like, who knows what 3/4 of an inch is? So I got to get my ruler out. I assume that's like a 20 mil edge or something, but yeah, I'm gonna look it up right now. Dude, nailed it. 19.05 millimeters. So yeah, it's basically a 20 mil edge, which is kind of the standard for heavy hangs and stuff. Dude, he could do 150 pounds on a 20 mil edge, on a 19 mil edge. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like it makes me a little surprised that he didn't climb harder things. You know, because he really only climbed like mid 513, which, you know, is sort of the hardest stuff around at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's like with that kind of strength, like I'd be climbing 515 for sure.
Do you think, and obviously like John eased up a little bit on the traditional ethics that he was so well known for, where he was, you know, basically sort of championing the fact that, I mean, he lost friendships over his belief that sport climbing shouldn't be a thing, and did all that. Do you think it's maybe a function of that? Because like what you're hearing is someone who's probably so strong, but at the same point, maybe he didn't end up climbing that hard because he adhered so much to the ethics.
Well, I don't know. What I'm hearing is somebody, I mean, you know, and I don't know, because I did meet John Bachar a few times, but never climbed with him and never really knew. But to me, it's like when you spend so much time soloing and so much time trad climbing and so much time only going ground up and on-sighting, you just climb everything statically and with a lot of control. And to me, that lends itself to this level of extraordinary strength where it's like, oh, my fingers are so strong, but it's just like static. And to me, it feels like he's missing the sort of explosive, the like jumping, the campusing, the like, you know, but the way he's climbing, it's not like he's ever going to be jumping for holds because, you know, you die. And so I don't know, it feels like he's just missing half of what is modern climbing, you know, like all the dynamic climbing on boards and things like that.